Hello, friends. Welcome to a Zoom live stream. As if you're not already sick of Zoom Zoom
What
meetings.
is this?
What is this?
Faces on a screen.
I'm Landon
Wow.
Woodson. I'm Landon Woodson. I'm the executive of the Synod of Mid-America, and joining me, only 25 minutes away, but also physically distant, socially isolated in his own house, is the stated clerk of the Synod and the stated clerk of Heartland Presbytery, Brian Ellison. Hi, Brian. I miss you.
Hi, Landon. I miss you too. This is way
Yes.
more than 6 feet. It seems excessive.
I know, right? Oh, I think the hardest part of all of this is when I actually get within 6 feet of people, I can't give them a hug. That is making me crazy.
I concur with that.
Yeah.
Landon did a very gracious drive-by birthday greeting for my partner, but it was painful to see to see him so close and yet not be able to actually interact with his family. But that's how it goes.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are feeling that way about their presbytery meetings and their committee meetings. I know that may sound strange to some people, but there are some of us for whom the folks that we work with at presbytery, with on session, in the synod, like these are some of our closest friends and colleagues, and to have to do all this work and not be able to have all the fun parts. Not that work isn't fun, we think work is fun, but to not have those personal aside moments of meeting together over the coffee pot. I think that's probably what is most tough for me, at least in this time of church life. Is that match
Yeah,
your
I think that's
experience?
right. I agree. And I do think, though, that Zoom is certainly not perfect. It does not replace that experience, but there is something a little bit better about this than alternatives of the past. The conference call meeting, the speakerphone in the middle of the table with some people like that. That is awkward. That is difficult. This has its moments of awkwardness for sure, but I do feel there's more of a chance to connect. I will share that when Heartland Presbytery had its presbytery meeting last week, there were 140 participants. And of course, you're looking at a screen with two faces on it. You might actually be able to see our facial expressions. But when the people would start popping onto the screen, and the way my screen is set up, I can have up to 49 on the screen at a time. We still, had to scroll through 3 pages to see everybody. There was something very powerful about it. It's not the same as being together in person, but I was glad we had it. It felt like we were a community coming together because we could actually see each other's faces, including the faces of people we hadn't gotten to see in a while. So
Right.
I really appreciated it.
Yeah. And because of that really great experience. So friends, Brian, as I said, serves as both the stated clerk of the Synod and of the Presbytery. And within a month, he ran two meetings, one with, as you say, 140-ish people, and our Synod meeting had around 50 folks. Both of them went off really well. And we feel like there are some things that we have learned from those experiences that would be beneficial to others. One thing that we're aware of, and so we wanted to share that, but one thing that we're aware of is this may feel like, as we were talking before we started recording, this may feel like it has a short shelf life, considering the fact that some of these physical distancing restrictions are going to be eased in the next month. But we really feel like there are some benefits to doing meetings and knowing how to do meetings this way that will extend long after these restrictions are in place. Brian, you had mentioned some of the participants in our Heartland Presbytery meeting that haven't been able to participate in a Heartland Presbytery meeting for years. We had folks from where?
We have a member in Vancouver who is there connected with his spouse's education. We have a couple where one is a mission co-worker in Egypt, and they're both ministers, and they were both able to participate in a meeting that gave us the opportunity to really connect, and it was very meaningful to do that. And not only folks that far away, but just folks for whom it's inconvenient to drive to a meeting, maybe 2 or 3 hours, but across the presbytery. Maybe they're mobility limited. There really were a lot of folks who were able to join us who wouldn't have otherwise. So it was a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start here. One of the things that I know you've given a lot of thought to, and a lot of your stated clerk colleagues have given a lot of thought to this. a lot of people were scrambling in the early days of this distancing and isolation time to figure out, could they even legally do this? And I put that in quotes because we all know everybody's going to feel okay about this. Everybody understands this is what we got to do. But Presbyterians like to make sure we're doing things orderly, decent, and in order by the book. We want to make sure we're doing things well and doing things right.
Yeah, I don't really care about that, but maybe some people do.
What are things, governance issues that a presbytery, a session, or even some of our sister synods, what are some governance things that we need to think about and that we could think about now, so that when this comes up again, this kind of meeting style is really conducive and we don't have to worry about at least that part of it?
Well, okay, so on a very technical level, Robert's rules say that you can do this as long as you have a provision for it in your manual or in your own bylaws. What, of course, a lot of us found out, wonder if I have that provision in my bylaws, and found out we didn't. So the thing you can do if you are able to meet in person sometime in the future is to go ahead and put something in your bylaws. Very simple. It says meetings may be held electronically. And set up the provisions for what would trigger an electronic meeting. Maybe it's the council of the presbytery can determine that a meeting should be held electronically. Maybe it's the moderator and stated clerk. You decide. But it's important to get that in there if you can. Now, if it's not in there and you can't hold an in-person meeting to change your bylaws, what do you do? What we did in Heartland Presbytery, and what I have known other presbyteries to be doing, and in fact, what the General Assembly itself is going to be doing in June, is to adopt a change to the standing rules or a temporary change to the standing rules that allows for this electronic meeting to be held. You have somebody like a council, in the case of General Assembly, it's the Committee on the Office of General Assembly, that is going to make a proposal that for this one occasion, we allow this electronic meeting to amend its own rules and go with it. Accept that there's some grace, that this is an extraordinary circumstance, have enough trust in each other to say we're doing the best we can, and go ahead and have the meeting you need to have. I've advised presbyteries to be somewhat thoughtful about not perhaps putting their most controversial possible agendas together, their most complicated ones. If there's things that can wait, maybe they should wait. But don't be afraid to have a meeting in good faith as you make every effort to be accessible and to include everyone and all the things you would do anyway. The one thing that the General Assembly is going to do, and that I think we're also going to do in Heartland Presbytery, is take a vote the first chance we get when we can have an in-person meeting again to ratify the decisions that were made at that one electronic meeting, or more than one, that were held under the revised standing rule. I think that's just a good pro forma way to say, yes, we're all on the same page now together. But I think you should go ahead and have those electronic meetings in good faith, doing your best to be as inclusive of the same community that would have been gathered in person.
That's really helpful. Yeah, I think, again, the thing that I've heard you, I've heard tell of you telling people this, everybody understands this is a different situation, but it won't always be this situation. And so we need to get these things in place so that people have confidence that when we meet this way and make decisions this way, everything's above board, because that's really what our polity and our parliamentary procedure is about, is making sure that things are above board and everybody knows what's going on.
That's right, but I think this trust, this grace will go a long way. I know of congregations that have held congregational meetings during this current public health crisis to authorize the sale of their building, to call a new pastor. Things that we would ordinarily say, well, we could never do that without gathering in person. We've found ways to summon the trust and the grace and the technological wherewithal to make it happen. And I do not believe that those ministries will be compromised by our having taken those leaps of faith.
Yeah, one thing that I've jokingly thought in my head, I've never said it, so I'll say it now, is I never want to hear a congregation or a church person say we've never done it that way before, because that no longer applies for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if that is a change, one of the lasting changes that comes to the church as a result of this public health crisis, then that isn't such a bad thing.
No, not at all. So those are the governance technical things. When we're talking about the actual mechanism, a lot of people are going to be using Zoom, and there may be other platforms that come up for this. Some congregations I can think of particularly may just want to use like a Google Hangout, or they want to use the FaceTime app, and that's fine. But for the most part, Zoom is as ubiquitous now in meeting world as Facebook is just for general social interaction. So let's stick with Zoom. What are some particular features of the Zoom platform that you think, particularly those of us who are hosting these meetings, and I think later on we can talk about people who are connecting to the meetings, but people who are hosting the meetings, what features do they need to be aware of?
So I think it would be helpful to look at first sort of the settings page, which is not actually found in the app that most people who use Zoom for meetings look at, but only on their website where you adjust some of the settings for meetings. And I agree with you, Zoom is the primary one to talk about, even though there are others. There are similar features on some other apps that folks can explore for themselves. I also will say one other thing. I think this is going to be different depending on if you're the chair of your church's hospitality committee trying to put together a 5-person meeting versus the stated clerk of your presbytery putting together a 200-person meeting. So understand that I'm going to give some general tips, but you're going to probably need to adapt those for the particulars of your situation. I'm going to share with you my screen. That's probably a good feature to learn.
Sharing is caring, Brian.
and I do care.
Yes, I know.
So here's the website for Zoom. You log in, you use your password, of course, and you go over to your personal profile. And it's just good to make sure that it is what you think it is with your account. You'll want to be the owner of your account. If you're just one of the users on an account that has many users, you may not be able to make all of the changes that you need to make. So make sure you know who that is and you can connect with them. The one thing I want to direct your attention to on this page is the capacity for how many people can attend a meeting. And I don't know, you're seeing my cursor, right?
I am, yes. Okay,
so right here where it says capacity, it's going to tell you how many people you can fit in a meeting. And if you have a free Zoom account, that is not a high enough number probably for most gatherings. Free Zoom accounts also only allow meetings of up to 40 minutes. So what you probably want if you're going to be hosting meetings, especially on a regular basis, is the Zoom Pro account, which charges you by the user on a monthly basis. You really don't need more users than you will ever have meetings going on at the same time. So in our presbytery, we do have 3 users because we might have different committees meeting at the same time with different people at them. But you probably only need 1 for your organization in most cases. But what that's going to come with standard is meetings of up to 100 people. If that's enough for you, great. If not, you can buy an additional package that gets you meetings of up to 500 people. Know that that's going to look pricey. It's $50 a month per user, but you can start and stop it as you need to. So I've expanded ours because we had a presbytery meeting this month. I'll be canceling it tomorrow. And if I need it again in a later month, I'll turn it on again. That's the profile page. Most of the things you care about looking at are on this settings page. So I'm going over here to the left and I'm clicking on settings. I'm just going to highlight a few of these. You can spend a lot of time playing with this and learning about Zoom and its features, but things you probably want to pay particular attention to. Host video, participant video, you want those things to show. Most of these are there by default. I do allow people to join before the host because that allows for some informal fellowship before the meeting begins, even if I'm not there.
I do that as well, and for the exact same reason. One of the things that I think we can do in this time is provide those moments of interaction, and that will just help our meetings just go so much smoother, I think.
I think that's right. There's some other things that you'll want to think about for your own security, particularly whether you're going to require passwords in certain situations. One of the ways that Zoom is encouraging folks to maintain security is to require passwords in more situations. I think that's probably a generally good idea, recognizing that it does create some accessibility issues for certain users. But remember, the password gets embedded in the link that you send to invite people to the meeting. So most people, if they're just clicking on a link that you sent them in an email, it doesn't matter whether there's a password or not. So go ahead and add the password, because if you don't, a person randomly clicking 10 digits could, in theory, find their way into your meeting. The other choice you need to make is whether you're going to mute people upon entry in the room. Here again, I do not do that because I like that informal setting, and as the host of the meeting, I have the power to mute them all when I want to, so I don't necessarily mute them upon entry. Continuing on in the...
Don't you wish we had that capacity in our in-person real-life meetings? I mean, you've moderated meetings, don't you wish you...
There, I'm tired of listening to Landon, so I've muted him from this meeting. But you will have that power as the host. Okay, I'm unmuting you.
You're amazing. I adore you.
So continuing on, the other things that you'll want to turn on, I believe, are chat. Chat is a way for your users to connect with you and with each other during the meeting. I like to turn it on and then tell them not to use it, or to use it very sparingly, but it does serve a few purposes, and we'll talk about that. I also want to highlight a few that really need to be turned on for you to have effective Zoom meetings. One is co-host. You do not want to be the only person with the host controls for your meeting. We'll talk about more of how you use your co-hosts, but I think at the very least, the moderator of the meeting needs to be a host, a co-host. And then I think you want to have a few trusted partners in monitoring a larger meeting. People who can mute people when their mics are on and unguarded, people who can rename people as they come into the room with less than their full name and they can't be fully identified, people who can kick someone out if they are an intruder to the meeting, if they're sharing inappropriate images or saying inappropriate things. You need some helpers, and that's what co-host does. Everyone you make a co-host gets the same powers you have as host of the meeting. Polling you want to turn on, and we'll talk about how polling works in a moment. Screen sharing is something that we're using right now so that you can see what I'm doing on the screen. You should know that in your control panel, you have the ability to control whether your screen share includes Zoom windows or not. So I have sometimes thought I was showing people what was on my Zoom screen, but they can't see it because there's a way to take out Zoom controls from what gets shared. So be aware that that's a thing you might have to control for. And then finally, the thing I want to point out you should turn on is nonverbal feedback. That's a really important feature that is going to allow you to do most of the cool things that make meetings work. So do turn on nonverbal feedback. And as we talk more about the running of the meeting, I'll talk about those features.
That's great. One of the things that is really important, and one of the things that I think you've done particularly well in the meetings that I've been a part of, where you've been the host and responsible for that, is you set people up for success pretty well. You trained them pretty well. What are the thought processes that you had when you were thinking about before the meeting? How do you train them? And then, I mean, it's almost like you're the TSA agent in the screening line. There are some things you say at the beginning of a meeting that you just say over and over and over again. How did you think about, and what in particular did you want to communicate to the folks in these meetings?
So I think it's important to provide some opportunities before the meeting, and then to provide some things right at the beginning. I think before the meeting, and part of how you get to that ability to provide that training before the meeting is through setting up a thoughtful registration process for a meeting, because that gives you a mailing list of people not only to share the meeting link with, but any training materials that you put together or that you find online. I prepared a tip sheet to send out that actually is going to contain a lot of the same information I'm sharing with you in this video. I found a link to a couple of videos that people could watch that were really hands-on, really step by step how you would connect. That tip sheet included a list of kind of the things you should do before the meeting. Make sure your camera works, make sure your microphone works. And then finally, we decided to hold a couple of practice Zoom sessions when we had the presbytery meeting. You're going to have some people participating for who unlike Landon and me, do not actually spend their days on 6 or 8 Zoom calls, but might actually be doing this for the first time. So we had a couple practice sessions, and I found them delightful, connecting with members of the presbytery who were so fascinated by this technology.
And it's such a hospitable thing to do. It's like, we can think about it as in the beginning of worship when we're going to sing a new hymn, not everybody knows it. Let's take a little time and let's work through it. That way, when we get into the worship service, we feel a little more comfortable singing that hymn. It sounds like that's exactly the kind of spirit you were trying to engender there.
It's a great analogy. And so I walked them through some of the things. I practiced muting and unmuting their microphones. We took votes on what we thought of the weather that day. And it was a good preparation. Once you're in the meeting, then I would suggest, especially the first time, but probably every time you do a Zoom meeting, to take 5 to 10 minutes to train people in a few simple things. And to get into the details of those things, I'm going to continue in this video to show you some of the features. But then what I'd suggest you do is actually show people those same features when you're the host of the meeting. We are, in fact, working on preparing a video that may be helpful as something you could share with people before a meeting. But you may want to do this yourself as someone who they can ask questions of and connect with during the meeting. So I offer that is my suggestion for how you go about the training. And as we continue this call, we'll give you the material you need.
Yeah, that's great. And I will also link down in the description. I'll get that tip sheet from Brian, and I'll make sure that is linked so that you all have access to that document. And you can, I'm sure Brian would be fine for you editing it for your context as need be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've thought through the governance. We've thought through our controls as a host. We've managed to train some people and get them maybe not comfortable, but at least not afraid or anxious about being a part of this. So now we get into the meeting. What do we need to think about when it comes to actually running the meeting? Because one of the things that I think both you and I were, I don't want to say surprised, because we like to think that we're competent people who work with competent people. But one of the things that we were just so pleased about was that these meetings, Brian, they went off without a hitch. God was smiling on us that day, right?
Right. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.
There was a lot of hard work. There was a lot of teamwork, actually, by several members of the presbytery staff to ensure that the publicity and the training and all of that happened. I also will say, and this is an unsolicited bit of praise, but our presbytery moderator, Elizabeth Metter-Strobel, our Synod moderator, Phil Stutzman, they were both excellent moderators. And that how shall I say, is not something that not every moderator is going to have the same experience level with something like Zoom. So you may have to do some coaching, but having a moderator who has a strong sense of how the controls work and how to address the camera when they're speaking, not just look down at their papers, to really engage the same way you would want them to engage in real life. And that's sort of what I keep telling people is, quit thinking about this as such a different experience. Think about this in terms of just a different venue, a different room that we're having the meeting in, that us to talk at a different volume or look in a different direction, but it's essentially the same thing. And even the ways we vote, they're going to feel different than when we're raising our hands in a meeting, we're checking a box on a ballot, but there are equivalents to those things that we can do with Zoom that work just as well. In fact, work almost exactly the same.
That's the thing that I noticed. In particular, are the two moderators that you mentioned. These are particularly folks who have particularly strong capacity at running a meeting, making sure a meeting is going. And one of the things that I thought made them very effective, certainly in real life, but especially in a digital environment, is they were very clear about where we were at. They gave very clear direction to the commissioners about what we were doing, what we needed to be voting. Um, they were not passive, I guess is what I would say. They were very active in their moderating. That serves them well in real life. It serves them particularly well in an online environment.
I couldn't agree more.
So a timid moderator is not what you want. Generally, you don't want an aggressive moderator, but you don't want a timid moderator, and you certainly don't want one on the Zoom meeting.
Right, and you also want a moderator and a clerk or whoever is hosting your meeting. I don't think it's good for the moderator to be the host of the meeting. They need to be able to focus on the discussion. But it is important that they work closely with the host of the meeting, which I'd say is usually the stated clerk in our Presbyterian context, or someone who's closely working with the clerk. They need to be able to communicate, to point out that someone's hand is raised that they've missed, to say, we're not quite ready for that vote yet, let me get that set up. And they need to be able to connect with each other. So let me share, if I can, Landon, how I think this looks in the meeting itself.
Yeah, that'd be great. Because I've done Zoom meetings, and there were things that you had that you were showing us that I had never really considered before, because I hadn't needed to. And I think a lot of people are going to be in that boat. So
I think you're now seeing the same screen that we've been seeing, except you're seeing the host screen.
Yeah.
Which includes a number of features down here at the bottom that are going to be really important for you to use during a Zoom session. I want to start with the thing that I usually tell people to think about first is muting and unmuting. That in a smaller meeting, I think it's best if people control their own muting and unmuting. So you ask them all to mute their mics and just unmute when they're going to speak. They will forget to unmute themselves, and you'll have to say, you're muted. It'll happen several times a meeting. That's okay. It's part of the rhythm of this meeting that's different.
And those are some of the best moments of the meeting. Can we just be honest?
It's true. And it's also when, but that happens in real life. You know, people who stand up from the pews and start talking and think that they can be heard, and the moderator has to say, come to the microphone. It's the same thing. A little trick to teach people about if they have muted their own mic and they want to unmute themselves just briefly to speak, is to use the space bar on their keyboard. And just hold it down as long as they're talking and then let go. It's just like a microphone turn on, turn off button. And that's a nice little trick for people to know. In a larger meeting, I generally tell people to unmute themselves. Everybody unmute yourselves, say goodbye, and then I mute them with the mute all feature on my control panel. And I'm just going to show you, I think you're now seeing the host participant panel.
I am.
The participant panel is kind of your, you can't see my face when I do that. The participant panel is the control center of the whole operation. You will spend most of your time staring not at the people's pictures, but the participant panel. Mm-hmm. And that's key to understand.
When I serve as co-host for folks like you, I've been one of those, trusted people behind the scenes. I just turn on speaker view on the video because I just care about who's talking at that particular time. But you're right, I'm scrolling all through those participant panels, making sure everybody's mic's off, video's off, all those sorts of things.
So I tell people in a large meeting to unmute themselves, and then I just mute everybody. Make sure that's really what I want to do. And now everyone else is muted except the host. I'll usually unmute the moderator, leave the moderator unmuted. And then only people get recognized, and that's when they get unmuted. In a smaller meeting, I think it's okay to leave people unmuted, and then you can still mute them when they, I'm going to unmute Landon again here. You can still unmute them when they I'm sorry, you can mute them if they're making some phone line noise or they've forgot that their mic was on and they started talking to their dog. Or,
Right.
but I think for the most part, it's in a larger meeting that you should go ahead and use the mute feature more liberally. Here's some other things in the participant box worth noting. You can't see it on my screen because for whatever reason, Zoom, when you're a host, doesn't think you have hands anymore. So a host or a co-host has their hands amputated and can't actually raise their hand. But Landon, if he opens his participant screen, is going to see that he still can raise his hand by clicking on the button that says raise hand. And when he does that, two things happen. In the participant screen, see right there, a little hand appears, and his name will actually move to the top of the list, right below the host. So if there were 100 names on this list, Landon would still be at the top because his hand is raised. That's why the moderator should also spend most of their time focused on the participant screen.
Because we can't see it in your participant box, the hand raise feature is just to the left of that green check mark for yes. So
shows up right down here.
Very easy to see.
And also notice that Landon's box, his little picture, shows a little hand up in the corner. You as the host, after you call on him, lower his hand. The other thing that our moderator, our very strong moderator, did is she actually went ahead and unmuted people at the time she recognized them. So if everyone was muted and Landon put his hand up, she would say, I recognize Landon Whitsitt, and unmute him and lower his hand all at once, and he would be able to talk.
Thank you, moderator. I would now like to wax on about something that has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
And we're just going to go ahead and mute you again. Don't let the power go to your head, though, friends. It's intoxicating. So the other nonverbals in this in this participant panel that are really important for running meetings are the yes and no buttons. I have come to believe that even though there is a polling feature on Zoom, and I will show you that in a minute, that is not the best way to vote in your meetings. The best way is through these yes and no buttons. Yes and no buttons on Zoom are the same thing as raising your hands for a vote in a presbytery. You can see how everyone voted. It's not a secret ballot. You can also see who's voting and who isn't. So if you have a whole bunch of people in your meeting who are observers or corresponding members, but who shouldn't be voting, you'll know if they are because the vote is going to appear right next to your name. Let's take a survey. Landon.
Yes.
Are you in favor of the fourth point of Calvinism? The irresistibility of grace.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, happy to.
Thanks for getting my theology up to speed.
All right. For purposes of discussion, I'm going to vote no. You'll see that a red X appears next to my name, a green check next to Landon's. Everybody can push the button. They can keep changing their vote if they would rather. The moderator says to stop. Notice in the tiny little numbers above these, only the host can see those numbers, or the co-hosts, but it gives you a vote count. Yeah. The moderator could report that the vote on this, on the fourth point of Calvinism was 1 in favor and 1 against. And as we know, that means the motion fails. And when you're done with that, when you want to clear all the hands or all the votes, there's a clear all button for the host. There are some other fun little nonverbals here. I think it would be pretty rude to use some of these in a presbytery meeting, like this one that says go faster. But hey, whatever works for you. There's even one that's a coffee cup that says you need a break, which I assume is not to get coffee, but because—
Oh, so the go faster is a way of trying to communicate to the person speaking, we need you to speed up.
Right. Or I think it might be in a meeting, in a corporate meeting, like we've got it. We're ready for you to go ahead.
Nice. I want to say that I agree with you that the yes/no buttons are a much more effective way of voting. We did that at our presbytery meeting. At our synod meeting, which happened before, you used the polling feature, and that also worked, I thought, very well.
You know, it works, but I'll show you why I recommend not using it.
But I think people do need to know that if they vote in the yes or no, that is a public thing. I mean, I have to be honest. I was one of 2 people that voted no on a motion at our presbytery meeting. I felt a little exposed being out there as somebody that people knew
Right.
that was my vote.
But no more exposed than you would have been at a presbytery meeting.
Correct.
Raised your hand.
Correct. That's what I had to tell myself.
Maybe more public if you've been sitting in the front of the room than in the back of the room at a presbytery.
Right.
Still. I will say the polling feature allows you to cast a non-public ballot, but has some other problems associated with it. So let's practice the polling feature. I'm going to put this poll. And so when I'm ready as the clerk, I launch the poll. And now a screen shows up. But what you're seeing is what I see as a host. And this is one of the problems with the polling feature. Can't vote using the polling feature. So if I'm a member of the presbytery, I wouldn't be able to vote on this motion because I'm a host. And if I want to add my vote, I'd have to do it in the chat box or by saying it out loud. In this meeting, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling, and then I can share the results so that everybody can see them.
Of course. I mean, come on.
100% of participants believe Mid-America is the best synod.
That's objectively true, Brian.
I think that
apologies to our colleagues.
But here's another problem. So it's wrong to call this a secret ballot. You can set this up to be anonymous, but you also can set it up to where it records each participant's vote. In fact, Zoom encourages teachers to use this function as a way of giving quizzes in classrooms. So you can have people cast their votes with their right answers, and then you'll have a full report of what everyone said. But that means it's not really a secret ballot, right? The other problem is that unless you review those reports later, in the moment, you can't be sure who is voting and who isn't. So if there's people in your meeting who are not entitled to vote, there's really no way to prevent them from voting in that paper ballot. So those are the limitations of polling. The other problem I have with it is that sometimes, for whatever reason, you launch it and some people can't see it, and then you have to stop it and try again. And that happened enough times in meetings I've been part of that I just prefer to stick with the participant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because hosts don't have hands, we also have made it a provision in groups I've been part of that they will seek recognition just by using the green circle instead of raising a hand. But you can do that accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Quick tip here, that green box in my line, that means I'm sharing my screen. And the cloud with the red dot in it means I'm recording.
Wait, you're recording this, Brian? Oh my God.
I am recording this. So watch what you say. The final thing I'm going to say, Landon, and then we are testing people's patience, but is to note this button at the bottom of the screen, reactions. I think one of the things people find most limiting about Zoom is that they feel like it inhibits their ability to connect informally in a meeting, to laugh, applaud, to run. These reaction buttons are designed to help with that at least just a little bit. If you like something you hear, there's a little applause symbol, and when you click on it, now everybody's applauding. And that'll stay on the screen for about 10 seconds, and then it'll go away. Just a lighthearted little way to indicate how you feel about something. Same with the up. I think it's fun.
Yes, I use thumbs up a lot, just in my general textual communication. So I like having it. I like having it available to me here. This has been really helpful. Lots of things that I think I knew by osmosis, but to have you say them out loud and to show me explicitly has made it really helpful. Are there things that the host needs to know that I might be able to use in real life? What are things that further things, final thoughts that we need to be aware of the connection between maybe running a Zoom meeting, running a normal meeting? Get real clerky on us right now is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's good, as I said, to make sure that people connect the things we're doing in Zoom to what we would be doing if this were a meeting.
Yeah.
Another thing to think about is how in a regular meeting you would indicate where we were in the agenda or what we're voting on. Depending on your own capacity for technology, you might consider, for example, having a PowerPoint presentation, just a blank PowerPoint screen ready to go so that you could type in an amendment that someone makes, or so that you could say, here's the item we're voting on, docket item number 4, and just flash it on the screen for 10 seconds when the discussion first begins, or 10 seconds before you vote. One of the pieces of feedback I've had is that people don't like the screen sharing to be dominant. They don't want a document on the screen the whole time we're talking about something. They want to look at people's faces. And since most people do not have the setup I do here, which is 3 screens, they want to actually be able to look at people's faces. And if there's a document on their screen, it limits their ability to do that. So use that sparingly, but it can be useful. I think all the other features that I would really say are the most important to know are the ones we've talked about. Zoom is a really powerful tool. My scan is done. It says I just got a pop-up. If Zoom is a really powerful tool, and it can do things that probably go beyond your daily needs, but for special reasons you might want them. You can set up breakout rooms. So you could send people out into subcommittees, essentially. You could assign people to rooms. If you're examining a candidate for ordination in a meeting and there comes a point where you would have them leave the room for a moment, you can send them and their family out to a waiting room and then bring them back when you're ready. There's a lot of things, and of course you can make recordings, which we're doing with this Zoom meeting, and you might find helpful, if for no other reason than to write your minutes after the meeting that you didn't have time to write because you were running a meeting. So there's a lot of things that are useful. I encourage you to play with it and check it out.
One of the things these are very useful, and I'm really grateful that you have shared this expertise. One of the things that you said just a moment ago about the screen sharing, I think we can extrapolate and really see as an overarching umbrella for everything you've talked about. You said that people don't like the screen sharing because they want to see and connect with other people, and all of the tips, tricks that you've given to us here. The thing that I really appreciate about it and that we need to think about is that these tools are designed to help people connect to other people. We would be remiss if we forgot that, if we treated this like it was just another opportunity to flash a PowerPoint. Zoom and all these things are not about digitally showing PowerPoints. They're about allowing people to connect to people. And really, when it comes down to our polity, when it comes down to our meeting, that's what makes our meetings run in normal life, in real life. It's people are connecting to people. You and I talk a lot about the fact that, we quote the Book of Order, this thing doesn't work without trust, love, and respect. And so however we run our online meetings have to promote that trust and that love and that respect so that people feel confident that in working with their sibling commissioners, that things are going well, and that the decisions that are made, we can truly say, these are what we best understand is what God wants us to be doing. And I know that because I trusted Brian, because I was able to connect with Brian on this meeting and on this platform.
Amen. And I hope that that's the future possibilities for this. I hope that, even when we are able to meet together in person again, and when that will actually be really important to do at times, that we'll still not feel like on occasions when we choose not to meet in person, when we choose to have a meeting this way for reasons of accessibility or distance or urgency, that we aren't giving something up, but rather we're taking advantage of yet another way to connect, yet another way to find community. I've even been giving some thought to whether we might even have, bear with me, more meetings as presbyteries or synods, knowing that we can count on the ability to do business when we need to this way, but then taking advantage of those in-person gatherings and sometimes these digital gatherings to not feel consumed by lengthy, complicated agendas, but rather to provide these as opportunities and those as opportunities for connecting and interacting and sharing in worship and sharing in community together. So I'm hopeful about the possibilities this opens up for us with little or no extra expense and a lot more accessibility for some people.
I totally concur. During our Presbytery meeting, I texted someone and said, I honestly hope we do all of our business this way from now on, because it was efficient. I felt like we got it done. We got it done well. I don't feel like anything was lacking. And then when we get together in person for our in-person things, those can become educational. They can become fellowship opportunities. We can strengthen the community in a way that a lot of times we just don't have time to in the ways that we've done it before.
Right. And you know,
and I know it's not one or the other, but
well, right. And the cynic in me, and maybe in you too, is that, you know, will people come to a meeting when there isn't business, when there's an agenda?
Yeah.
And I think there's probably places and times where people would not have done that.
Yeah.
Would do it still.
Yeah.
But I think that's the systemic problem worth addressing.
Yeah.
That's the situation we need to work together to move towards seeing our councils as more than governing bodies, seeing as a group of people that are connected to each other in a covenant.
That is very well said. Well, Brian, I think we should end this part of our education time. For those of you who have watched this, look for part 2 of this fun little webinar Brian is doing for us. And I say fun because, by golly, polity is fun, and I defy.
It is.
Fight me. So look for part 2, and part 2 we're specifically going to be talking to the people, not the hosts as we've done here, the people running the meetings, but we're specifically going to be talking to the people who are going to be joining the meetings and participating in the meetings. And our hope is that our conversation will allow you all, the folks who are hosting and running these meetings, to utilize that video to send out to your folks in hopes that it will bring them some measure of comfort, or at least lower their anxiety about those things. So stay tuned for part 2. Brian, thank you for part 1. I'll see you after the break.
See you, Landon.